I don't often use notes, but sometimes I have to, because like I told y'all before, I have a little bit of a simple mind, and some words confuse me at times, especially if it's words that we don't use all the time. So the word today is covenant, right? So I'm thinking, okay, well, what is a covenant? Because we're talking about covenants in the first reading. Last week it was the covenant with Noah. This week it's part of the covenant with Abraham. And next week we're going to listen to some of God's covenant with Moses. But what is a covenant? So I said, well, let's do a comparison between a covenant and a contract. So you see, I made some notes. So a contract is an agreement enforceable by law. A covenant is more of a promise to do or not to do something. The biggest differences in the two. A contract is legally binding. A covenant is a spiritual promise. A contract is an agreement. A covenant is a perpetual pledge. A contract you sign, a covenant you seal. How awesome is that one? A contract is mutually beneficial. A covenant is something you fulfill. You can opt out of a contract, while a covenant is about having the strength to hold up to your promise. You can stop paying on a contract when the party is not holding up to their end of the agreement. In a covenant, the party not getting their needs met can support the one not filling the obligation. So that's the difference, right? But we look at the two, the contract and the covenant, right? So we listen to about the covenants that we have that God has made with us throughout time, right? All of these different people that God made a covenant, a promise to. And that He tried to hold up to His end of the promise. So I'm going to share with you a quote from this week, and some people have already heard this because they get my quotes. And this one, and I'm going to explain it a little bit more after. And it says, life can give you a gut full of reasons to be angry, but you only need one to be grateful. And that's Father Stu. I watched the movie again this past week, so that's where I get my homiletic stuff from. But anyway, so we look at this story about Abraham, right? Abraham was given this promise of a son, right? Isaac is the son of promise. God came to him and said, next year when I pass this way, you will have a son. And Abraham was up in age. If you remember, right, Sarah laughed, and the following year she had a son. So I guess the joke was on her. But anyway, so here God comes. He made this promise. He fulfills it. And then God says, okay, Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your son to me. And Abraham, in his faith in what God promised, was willing to do that. Now, we hear the story, we know the story, right? But I'm going to tell you some of it. We see pictures of Abraham and Isaac, the little drawings, and they're going up the mountain, and Abraham is this old man, and Isaac is this little bitty boy. Well, tradition holds that Isaac was 33 years old. Isn't that a coincidence? So he carried up the wood, and it says in there, he carried up the wood of the sacrifice on his back. Wow, who else carried wood of the sacrifice on his back? God is telling us a story here. He's showing us about His promise and about how our faith should be compared to Abraham. Because you see, Abraham was willing to do this. He was willing to sacrifice his son because he believed that God could bring life out of death. Because he believed that God could do anything, but mainly that God could bring life out of death. But the one thing that nobody ever says or questions, what was Isaac's response? Here he goes, they set up this altar, and his dad ties him up and pulls a knife on him, and he doesn't fight back because he had faith in his father's faith. So the story goes on, right? The angel comes and stops him from killing his son. So Abraham, and he tells Abraham, he said, because you listened, because you were willing to give up your dream, you were willing to give up everything that you loved to me, I'm going to bless you abundantly. So Abraham finds this ram, okay, and here's another little coincidence, right? The ram was always associated with the king. Okay, so he's caught in the thicket, right, in the thorns by his horns. So Abraham sacrifices that ram in the Holocaust to God. Because you see, Abraham believed that God would provide the lamb, just like he had told Isaac. God will provide the lamb. So God is telling us, hey, look, I want to provide for you, but you have to have faith in me. You have to have that faith of Abraham. Do we? Can we say that we're willing to give up and surrender whatever God asked us to do, to go wherever he sends us? But what does God hear most of the time? Well, maybe not this week, God, because, I'm a little busy. I mean, I got quite a few things I have to take care of. What, feed the poor? No. Well, I'm kind of struggling myself. So, I don't know if I can really, offer those resources to help out other people. So sometimes, we hold back, right? But that one thing that we have to be grateful for, just like Abraham, is that we know that God is for us. And Paul says that if God is for us, who can be against us? Right? So we have the Almighty God on our side, so what are we afraid of? One of the commentaries I read this week, he said, isn't it amazing how the second week of Lent, they put the Transfiguration with the story of Abraham. And he said it's really hard to relate the two. Of course, the guy I was reading related the two, right? So he talks about the Transfiguration. Jesus brings up his disciples, and Moses and Elijah appear, and the whole story. And real quick though, I was having lunch with a priest one day, and he was showing me the pictures of the Holy Land, because he had just come back from the Holy Land. When he was all excited, and he's showing us the pictures that he took. And I told him, I said, that's on my bucket list. I want to go to the Holy Land one day. And he said, they won't let you in. I said, what? What are you talking about? They won't let me in. He said, no, they won't let you in. I said, I don't understand. He said, no. He said, you look too much like Moses. They're never going to let you into the Holy Land. So I think I've kind of scratched it off my bucket list. But anyway, but you see, when Jesus was conversing with Elijah and Moses, he was talking, they were relating to him the prophets and the law. And that's what was everything that was there. Everything in the covenant, everything in God's promise was there right there before the apostles. And the reason why Peter said, let us build a tent for you and Moses and Elijah, was because they wanted to stay there. But they couldn't. You see, and when that cloud came over them, and they heard the voice of God say, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. And then when Jesus told them, okay, look, y'all got to keep this quiet until the Son of Man rises from the dead. And the end of the gospel says that they were contemplating what rising from the dead meant. So you see, what this kind of tells us is that at that point, the apostles did not have the faith of Abraham. Because they didn't relate the fact that God could bring life out of death. You see, so they were still on the journey, just like we are. They were still struggling with faith, just like we are. So we have to ask ourselves, do I have the faith of Abraham? Can I surrender when God asks me to surrender? Can I go where God is pointing for me to go? You see, and if we needed two things to be grateful, we have Jesus Christ and his sacrifice for us. And we have the great honor of being here today with Him, because Jesus Christ is going to be here on this altar so that we can receive Him. Because you see, because of His sacrifice, His death, and His resurrection, He gives us the bread of life. You see, God can bring life out of death. And that's why we're here today, right? It's so that we can receive that life. We can surrender to God in that covenant that He created for us. And be willing to have that faith of Abraham. Be willing to make the sacrifices that are really difficult to make. You see, my prayer this Lent is that God can transfigure our hearts to be as strong as Abraham. That God can transfigure our faith to have the courage to be able to listen and to do when God calls. We have to ask ourselves that question, right? Do I have the faith that Abraham had? Do I really believe that God can bring life out of death?